Bom dia a todos. Sejam muito bem-vindos ao nosso webinar. So welcome to everyone watching this stream live at the Evidence for Climate Action Pavilion, and welcome to everyone online all around the world. Welcome. So this session is focused on the synthesis and analysis work that the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, that's 3IE, and DEFRA, the UK government's Environment Department, have been collaborating on over the past couple of years. And the work forms part of DEFRA's What Works programme, which seeks to develop the knowledge and tools to improve the effectiveness of international climate and biodiversity policy and programming. I'm Robbie Wilson. I lead DEFRA's What Works programme, and I have with me today Pierre Marion from 3IE, who has led the two research projects that we'll be talking about today. They are an evidence gap map, or EGM, of global climate and biodiversity interventions, and a systematic review of land management interventions that report on both environmental and human wellbeing outcomes. So the What Works programme furthers the UK's aim to continue developing as a supportive partner and a strong voice on climate and biodiversity action. And it's for this reason that, as well as being used internally to guide decision making, the EGM is currently available, and the systematic review will soon be available online as a public good, so that researchers and anyone interested can make use of the knowledge. So a quick bit of housekeeping about today's session. You'll probably have noticed that only Pierre and I have video and audio. So please do add your questions to the chat as we go. It can be questions for either Pierre, myself, or both. And please, if you feel comfortable, please do post your questions to all so that everyone can see interesting questions coming in. So the whole session is 30 minutes. We'll have a presentation from Pierre, then a little bit more context from me, and then over to your questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. So without further ado, over to you, Pierre.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Robbie, for that introduction. And you've already provided a lot of information. So as Robbie said, I'm going to present two outputs, two phases of this What Works program. And so I'm going to briefly talk about the methods and finding of both phases, the EGM and the SR, and I'll pass it back to Robbie to discuss DEFRA's perspective. So a final slide illustrating this What Works program. So the first phase, the EGM, sort of informed the second phase, the systematic review. EGM was done in 2024. Systematic review was conducted in 2025, and so I'm going to go through the EGM first, and then move on to the SR. So for those who don't know what evidence gap map is, this is just a very brief snapshot of the online map. And as Robbie said, it's already available online, it's public good. And so EGM shows the available evidence and also the gaps in the evidence across a framework of intervention types and outcome types. So here specifically, you see where both meet the intervention and the outcome, you see a varying amount of evidence. And so as I said, it's sort of a visual overview of where we have gaps, where we have clusters of evidence. And so that's very useful for research. It can avoid duplication of research efforts and also help prioritize programming. So very briefly, in terms of the framework that we used for this EGM, so we focused on interventions on studies looking at interventions within these 4 natural systems or productive activities: land and forest, agriculture and livestock, aquaculture and fisheries, coasts and oceans. And so we tried to have a broad, try to be as comprehensive as possible in terms of the intervention instruments. And so here you have 7 types, but we had approximately, I think, 40 intervention types in the map. And so our outcomes, as we're looking at both climate, biodiversity and human welfare, we included those outcomes. And then finally, in terms of another important inclusion criteria is in terms of the study design. So we only included impact evaluations. So these inform on the effects of a program, and then systematic view. So those inform on the overall effectiveness of an intervention type. And so it's systematic view of impact evaluations. Yeah. So diving into the results, what we found is that there's been a recent rise in the evidence base around these interventions. The evidence seems to be concentrated on interventions in land and forests and agriculture and livestock, natural systems, productive activities. So this represents an important base or a solid base for future synthesis work. A lot of evidence was also found within these regions, so Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia and Pacific, Latin America and the Caribbean. Very limited evidence on interventions in South Asia, Middle East and North Africa. Also very limited evidence on studies evaluating agriculture and fisheries, but also coast and oceans interventions. In terms of the outcomes, we didn't find many studies looking at the effects of these interventions on both environmental and human well-being, human welfare outcomes, and also looking at longer-term outcomes. So this was in terms of the impact evaluations, and I know I went extremely quickly on this very large project, but just to finish on the impact evaluations, it included a very large number, so 1,500, more than 1,500 impact evaluations. And then in terms of the systematic reviews, we found we included 93, and so unfortunately only 10% were praised as medium or high confidence, and all the high, medium and confidence reviews, systematic reviews, were published after before 2020. Yes, so the EGM identifies this specific EGM identifies the gaps and the clusters of evidence, and as I said earlier, can inform where we believe future research and programming should take place. So then in terms of the systematic use, as I was saying, the EGM, the evidence gap map, informed the systematic review. And so we tried to identify intervention types within the EGM where we did not identify any recent high or medium confidence systematic view, and where we had more than 50 impact evaluations. And so these are the 3 intervention types that we included. So decentralized land management and monitoring, land rights, and protected areas. And so a very important aspect of this systematic view, as Robbie said, is that we only focused on studies that there were impact evaluations, of course, but also reported both on environmental and human well-being outcomes in order to identify trade-offs, synergies, and unintended consequences. So this is just in terms of the evidence base that we found for this systematic review. So you have the 3 intervention types on top, and the cells in blue indicate where we had sufficient amount of data to do meta-analysis, so quantitative synthesis of the evidence. And so we found two main conclusions: is that there's a uneven distribution across intervention types, and also outcomes. Longer term outcomes are we did not find sufficient sufficient evidence to do a meta-analysis. So, for example, climate mitigation, nutrition, health, and well-being, etc. In terms of the overall effects, the main findings from our meta-analysis that we found positive effects on intermediate outcomes, livelihood outcomes. And so we sort of found consistent results across the 3 intervention types. So I won't go into details, but yeah, so natural resource use and management improvements, greater income, greater employment, but the evidence base was quite small, as you can see. So not many studies were looking at the effects of both treatment of environmental and human welfare outcomes. And so another way to try to identify these trade-offs between these 2 types of outcome is to look for additional qualitative evidence.
Yeah.
Hello,
You're
sorry,
back.
did
You're
you
back.
disconnect?
We
Yeah,
lost you for a
sorry.
second.
Sorry about
But you were
this.
just talking about we lost you just where you're talking about the second method for investigating trade-offs. I think you were going into the qualitative analysis.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Sorry about this. Yeah,
No worries.
so in terms of the qualitative evidence that we found, and so these are pretty much the results from this analysis. So alignment with local livelihoods, respecting traditional values, and including community groups, knowledge sharing and collaboration enabled success and greater impacts of these interventions, but unfortunately, unclear governance and funding cause mistrust, corruption, etc. And so in terms of trade-offs, one major trade-off that we found was that sometimes conservation goals can harm livelihoods or ecosystems, especially if the incentives are misaligned. In terms of costs, we found extremely sparse evidence, only for 4 out of the 60 programs included. So just to finish, so we definitely see major gaps across both the EGM and the SR in the evidence, and this is particularly important when we're facing with the climate and biodiversity crisis urgency. So just to conclude, so future programs and evaluations would benefit from learning from the evidence that we've mapped in this EGM. And obviously it needs to be based on the specific context and local dynamics. More rigorous impact evaluation and synthesis analysis, obviously specifically within the gaps that we highlighted in the EGM, and mainly emphasizing the systematic review is the importance of measuring environmental and well-being outcomes, and also longer-term outcomes in the same study in order to capture these trade-offs, and then integrating local populations in groups within programming. And so, yes, I'll pass it back to you, Robbie.
Thanks so much, Pierre, both for all your work across these 2 projects and for a great presentation. So before we answer your questions, everyone, Arunjana, thank you so much for your question. We'll come to that in a moment. Please do keep adding more questions as we go. But yeah, I thought it would be helpful just for me to add a little bit about what we at DEFRA and our colleagues across government have found most important from these projects, and also just add a little bit of the policy context. So I'm an evidence professional working in government, so kind of really at that interface between evidence and policy and programming. So firstly, the key findings for us have been building on what Pierre's been saying. So firstly, interventions often make a positive impact. So taking action on the climate and biodiversity crises is absolutely worthwhile. It's not a lost cause, and that really helps us make the argument for continued action within and between governments. However, secondly, as Pierre outlined there, the evaluation evidence currently is quite lacking overall, both on impact and especially on cost effectiveness as well. And this does really hamper decision making. So there's still much more work for us to do. And thirdly, impact evidence, particularly quantitative impact evidence on interventions, particularly those seeking both environmental and development outcomes. That evidence is highly context specific, which makes generalizable findings quite hard to generate. And this generalizability point is really important because there's a real strong demand for generalizable findings from policy and programming colleagues, which is entirely understandable. It won't surprise anybody on this webinar today when I say that the scale of the problem that we're facing demands scalable or replicable interventions. However, this tension does make things tricky. So this tension between context specificity and demand for generalizability can also make it tricky for us within governments. We have to balance the demand for generalizable findings with, for example, the UK's commitment to inclusive and locally led programming, since this kind of programming requires context specificity and context sensitivity to be effective. So these are things that we've been thinking about, and so to address the key findings and also that bit of policy context that I've outlined there, we're within DEFRA, we're exploring different strands for the next stage of the What Works programme. Got 3 of these, again, the magic number. So 1, holistic approaches to evidence generation to support both inclusive action and generalizable findings, such as how impact is achieved. So expanding the What Works programme to how it works as well as what works. Secondly, technological innovation in evidence generation and analysis. I mean, I could hardly speak for 5 minutes in 2025 and not mention AI, could I? AI is not the whole story, of course, but will undoubtedly play a part. And thirdly, promoting robust and context-appropriate impact evaluation, both throughout and beyond our own policy and programmes. So this is entirely without prejudice or commitment, but just like to say that we at DEFRA just like to take this opportunity to say we're really, really keen to connect with anyone on the call or who watches this as a recording, who's interested in or actively pursuing any of those 3. So holistic approaches, so that would include traditional and indigenous knowledges, for example, technological innovation, and or exploring collaborative means to improve the global impact evidence base in this area. So with that in mind, I'll pop my email in the chat, and please do reach out so we can continue the conversation if you would like to. So now to questions. Please do keep adding more as we go. I realise quite a few have flooded in whilst I was giving that bit of extra context there. Let's see, we've got so the first one, the issue of governance. Pierre, I guess for you, was there anything, asking about any findings or lessons specifically relating to governance related issues that stood out?
Yes, thank you for that question. So it's obviously is definitely a key aspect within. So this was specifically within the systematic review, but and therefore it was in terms of land management interventions, but obviously it relates to other climate change and biodiversity interventions, as obviously you need to manage the resources across so limited resources across increasing number of people. So I think mainly, and so I can't think of a specific example from the systematic review, but I think funding of governance organizations at the local level, adequate funding of these organizations is very important. Training, very important. And so I think what we sort of found within the systematic review is that these governance organizations, governance groups that were managing the protected areas, the land rights, the decentralized community land monitoring and management were not properly supported by the organizations, by the funding and implementing organization. So I think, yeah, that's probably if we are to have these governance organizations at the local level, they need to be sufficiently trained and funded. Should I let you choose next question, Robbie?
Thanks, Pierre. Yeah, and just to add to that, that governance absolutely, yeah, is a large and sometimes slippery thing to kind of address, and it's for this reason that we're now looking at multifaceted and holistic approaches to tackling this question. So I very much at the outset at the moment, but governance is absolutely something that we would be seeking to understand more and better as we hopefully progress a project around researching into how positive impact is achieved. Are there generalizable, are there replicable approaches to governance that we can identify, that we can and then bring to people's attention so that they can be implemented in the hope of, like I say, increasing the effectiveness of interventions overall. So we have a question from Alexandra about the misalignment of conservation and livelihood goals. So the question is, are there any mitigation measures that you found from the evidence that could work here? Best practice examples, if not large N quantitative studies. And again, I think just if I just kick off on this one, I think again, this is, like I say, why we're really interested in broadening the question from just what works to how things work, thinking on a process level as well as an impact level to kind of get this holistic approach to understanding effectiveness of interventions better. And that is absolutely something that we would hope would come from this next stage. Now that we know some of where that, so we know where the gaps are from the EGM. We've explored the extent of the quantitative evidence and done the meta-analysis that is possible at the moment, and found that we need more of that primary research to build the evidence base in order to be able to conduct more and wider meta-analysis in the future. But yeah, this is again why we're also looking at, like I say, holistic approaches to investigating the question further. And those mitigation measures are something that we're incredibly interested in finding out ourselves. So, Pierre, was there anything that I might have missed in terms of mitigation measures that we're currently aware of?
Yeah, so I mean, just to add to what you said, I think what we found within the qualitative analysis, because as you said, Bobby, it's very much qualitative mechanisms. What we did find is that the aligning with the local incentives. So obviously, if income sources are coming from a specific activity, but then these conservation activities is preventing or in some cases stopping these activities, then obviously this is going to take place. So obviously we would at 3IE suggest evaluations that collect data as the intervention is going on in order to check that this misalignment of incentives between the project and between the program and the local incentives are not clashing. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Fab, thank you very much. William has asked about thinking about the potential conflict between conservation and livelihoods, when I guess it's yes, it is indeed a definition question. So Pierre, if you could perhaps just expand a little bit on specifically within the systematic review, how we defined livelihoods, what those outcome, a little bit more detail on the outcome measures relating to livelihoods, I think would answer William's question.
Yeah, so the term livelihood is mixed here in this slide that I'm showing with well-being. So I probably should have adjusted it, but yeah, so all the livelihood or well-being outcomes are listed from knowledge acquisition to multidimensional poverty. And so as you're, I guess, hinting from your question is, yes, so obviously these people receiving the projects are often reliant on natural resources to generate income, sources of employment, food security, etc. So, so in order just to add that, in order to be included in the systematic review, the study had to report on both the first 3 rows going up to climate mitigation, and also an outcome on well-being. So from the last 2 parts. Yeah.
Fab, thanks. And just to reiterate that the systematic review will soon be published, both on the Campbell collaboration website and also ourselves on our publication portal at DEFRA as well. So you'll be able to dig into the full detail of all the findings. In terms of notable cases of how the pieces of evidence feed into each other. Victor, your question. This is, I guess, if we had audio for you, I would ask you to maybe expand on that a little bit. But I think really, so just to recap again, the systematic review took as its sample, the sample rather for the systematic review was drawn from the evidence gap map. So they directly followed from one another and are really quite intimately related. And then Craig, just on your point about where the gaps are, so I realise we're at time. But yes, absolutely. This is so yeah, experimental and QED studies are those that have formed the evidence gap map and the quantitative side of the systematic review. There was additional qualitative evidence, and again, you'll be able to see the full range of that when it is published. And yeah, just again, this is why we're absolutely looking to develop that more holistic approach, building on what we've done here and taking it further. So yeah, thanks everyone so much for your questions, for coming along today. Thanks to Pierre. And just to reiterate again, so Pierre's put his email in the chat. I've put mine. I'll put it in again, just so that it's right there for everybody. And enjoy the rest of COP. Thank you ever so much. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.